What does it take to turn pain into purpose? Picture this: a nurse, dedicated and compassionate, loses everything she's worked for in the blink of an eye. But when fate pushes her to the edge, she discovers a strength she didn't know she had. This is the story of Aaliyah Carter, a woman who refused to let adversity define her and instead built a legacy that changed lives, including her own. Ready to hear how one moment can alter the course of a lifetime? Let's dive in. The sterile scent of antiseptic fills the air as Aaliyah pushes open the door to Dr. Whitmore's office without knocking. She doesn't need to, she's been summoned here for what feels like the 100th time this year. But something about today feels heavier than usual. Dr. Karen Whitmore sits behind her desk, her blonde hair pulled into a tight bun, glasses perched at the edge of her nose. She looks up briefly before returning her gaze to some papers spread across the desk. "Aaliyah," she says coolly, her tone clipped and devoid of warmth. "Have a seat." Aaliyah hesitates for a moment, then pulls out the chair opposite the doctor. She crosses one leg over the other, trying to appear calm, though her heart pounds in anticipation. "You've been with us for 6 years now, haven't you?" Dr. Whitmore begins, flipping through a document that seems more like props than actual reading material. "Yes, ma'am," Aaliyah replies, her voice steady but tinged with unease. 6 years next month. Dr. Whitmore nods absently, still not looking directly at her. "Well, I'm afraid I have some difficult news. As you may know, Memorial West Hospital has been facing challenges. Budget cuts are inevitable." "Budget cuts?" Aaliyah repeats, her voice rising just enough to betray her disbelief. She leans forward slightly, gripping the arms of the chair. "What does that mean for me? For my patients?" "It means we're restructuring," Dr. Whitmore explains, finally meeting Aaliyah's eyes, but only fleetingly. "Unfortunately, your position is being eliminated." Aaliyah stares at her, stunned. The words hit her like a punch to the gut. "Eliminated? Just like that? After everything I've done for this place? I understand how hard this must be." "No, you don't." Aaliyah interrupts, her voice sharper now. She catches herself and takes a deep breath, forcing herself to lower her tone. "I've poured 6 years of my life into this hospital. 6 years of late nights, missed birthdays, skipped dinners, all because I believed in helping people. And now you're telling me it was all for nothing?" Dr. Whitmore adjusts her glasses, clearly uncomfortable but unwavering. "It's not personal, Aaliyah. It's business." "Not personal?" Aaliyah echoes bitterly, shaking her head. "That's rich. Because when someone like me gets pushed aside, it sure feels personal." As silence stretches between them, Aaliyah fights back tears. She knows better than to let her emotions show too much in front of Dr. Whitmore, whose icy professionalism leaves no room for vulnerability. Still, anger bubbles beneath the surface, mingling with fear. Finally, Dr. Whitmore clears her throat. "We'll provide severance pay and assistance with finding new employment. HR will reach out soon to discuss details." "Details," Aaliyah mutters under her breath, standing abruptly. "Right. Details." She turns to leave, but pauses by the door. Without looking back, she says quietly, "You know, I always thought places like this were supposed to care about people. Guess I was wrong." Before Dr. Whitmore can respond, if she even intended to, Aaliyah steps out into the hallway, pulling the door shut behind her with a soft click. Her mind races as she makes her way toward the exit. Not personal, she thinks bitterly. Yeah, right, to people like Dr. Whitmore, maybe it really isn't personal. But to Aaliyah, it feels like betrayal. Betrayal by the very institution she'd sworn to serve. She pushes through the automatic doors and steps outside, where the crisp Chicago wind bites at her cheeks. Wrapping her coat tighter around herself, she glances down at the stack of unpaid bills tucked inside her bag. Rent. Utilities. Student loans. How is she supposed to keep up with all of that without a steady paycheck? Aaliyah walks aimlessly along the sidewalk, her boots clicking against the pavement. The city buzzes around her, cars honking, pedestrians rushing past, but she feels strangely detached, as if she's watching everything unfold from a distance. Her thoughts drift to her patients. Mrs. Henderson, who relied on her cheerful bedside manner during chemotherapy treatments. Little Tommy, whose feverish cries had melted her heart until he finally smiled again. Even Mr. Patel, who teased her relentlessly about bringing him extra Jell-O cups. What would happen to them now? Would they even notice she was gone? Tears well up in her eyes, but she blinks them away fiercely. Crying won't solve anything. Not the bills piling up at home, not the gaping hole where her sense of purpose used to be. For the first time in years, Aaliyah feels truly lost. But as she rounds the corner onto a quieter street, a flicker of determination sparks within her. Maybe this wasn't the end. Maybe it was just the beginning of something else. Whatever lay ahead, she knew one thing for certain: she wouldn't go down without a fight. The cold Chicago wind whips around Aaliyah as she walks, her hands shoved deep into the pockets of her coat. Her breath fogs in front of her, each exhale a reminder that life doesn't pause, not even for moments like this. She keeps walking, though she has no real destination in mind. Her mind replays Dr. Whitmore's words over and over again, it's not personal. But it felt personal. It always feels personal when you're the one left standing on shaky ground, trying to figure out how to keep moving forward. She pulls her phone from her pocket, scrolling through her contacts until she lands on Mom. Her thumb hovers over the call button for a moment before she finally presses it. The familiar ringtone fills her ear, and after 2 rings, her mother answers. "Aaliyah, sweetheart." "What a surprise," her mom says warmly, her voice carrying the comforting lilt of someone who knows how to make you feel loved just by speaking. "Hey, Mom," Aaliyah replies, forcing a smile into her voice. "How are you?" "Oh, you know me, same old, same old. Just watching reruns of Jeopardy, and wondering why Alex Trebek isn't here anymore." Her mom chuckles softly, but then her tone shifts. "Is everything okay? You sound off." Aaliyah hesitates. She wants to tell her mom everything: the job loss, the unpaid bills, the sinking feeling in her chest, but the words catch in her throat. Instead, she forces herself to laugh lightly. "Everything's fine, Mom. Just tired, you know. Long day at work." "Well, don't wear yourself out too much, alright? You've got so much going for you." Aaliyah swallows hard, guilt twisting in her stomach. "Yeah, I'll be okay. Don't worry about me. I'll figure things out." Her mom sighs gently. "Alright, baby. But remember, you can always call me if you need anything. Anything at all." "I will, Mom. Love you." "Love you too, honey." The line goes dead, and Aaliyah lowers the phone, staring at the screen. Telling her mom would only worry her. And what good would that do? For now, she'd have to carry this weight alone. She slips the phone back into her pocket, but not before glancing at the notifications flashing across the screen. One catches her eye immediately, an email from her landlord titled "Urgent, Rent Payment Overdue." Her heart sinks as she opens it. Sure enough, there it is in bold letters: "Your rent payment is past due. Please remit payment within 48 hours or face eviction proceedings." Eviction. The word hits her like a freight train. She already knew she was behind, but seeing it written out so bluntly makes it impossible to ignore. Aaliyah stops walking and leans against a lamppost, closing her eyes tightly. How had it come to this? Just 6 months ago, she'd been confident, sure of her place in the world. Now, she felt untethered, like a ship lost at sea with no compass to guide her. What do I do now? She wonders silently. How do I start over? Every option feels overwhelming. Applying for new jobs means starting from scratch, convincing strangers that she's worth hiring. And even if she found something soon, how would she cover her expenses in the meantime? Her thoughts spiral further. What about her patients? Who would take care of them while she scrambled to pick up the pieces of her own life? But beneath the fear and frustration lies a stubborn spark, a refusal to give up completely. Pushing off the lamppost, Aaliyah resumes her walk, slower this time. She lets her feet carry her toward Millennium Park, drawn to the familiarity of its towering skyline reflection in Cloud Gate, better known as the Bean. As she approaches, she notices a street performer nearby, a young man playing soulful tunes on his saxophone. His music seems to echo her mood, blending melancholy with faint traces of hope. She watches him for a moment, letting the notes wash over her. People drop crumpled bills into his open guitar case, and he nods gratefully to each one. Watching him hustle for tips reminds her of her own struggles, of how fragile stability can feel, no matter how hard you work. Aaliyah reaches into her pocket, pulling out a few coins. She hesitates for a second, then drops them into the case. The musician flashes her a grateful smile, tipping his hat. "Thank you," he says, his voice warm despite the chill in the air. "You're welcome," she murmurs, stepping back. For some reason, the simple exchange eases the tension in her chest just a little. Maybe she wasn't entirely alone in this fight. Sitting down on a nearby bench, Aaliyah pulls her knees to her chest, wrapping her arms around them. She stares out at the cityscape, the towering buildings glowing under the fading light of dusk. Her mind drifts to the people she loves, the ones counting on her. Her mom, who'd raised her on her own and never complained about the sacrifices she made. Her best friend Mia, who'd been her rock through every crisis. Even her patients, who trusted her to show up when they needed her most. She couldn't let them down. Not now. Not ever. Taking a deep breath, Aaliyah straightens her posture, determination flickering in her eyes once more. She didn't have all the answers yet, but she knew one thing for sure: giving up wasn't an option. Whatever came next, she'd face it head-on. The sun dips lower in the sky, casting long shadows across downtown Chicago. Aaliyah continues walking, her steps slow and deliberate as she tries to steady her racing thoughts. The weight of her situation still presses heavily on her shoulders, but she clings to the small spark of resolve that had flickered to life earlier. She passes by an upscale cafe with large glass windows, its outdoor seating area buzzing with well-dressed patrons sipping lattes and chatting animatedly. For a moment, she considers stepping inside, maybe grabbing a coffee to warm herself up, but decides against it. She can't afford luxuries like that right now. Just as she's about to move on, a sudden commotion catches her attention. Across the street, near the curb, a wealthy-looking older man stumbles awkwardly before collapsing onto the pavement. His tailored suit and expensive leather shoes make him stand out among the crowd, but no one seems sure of what to do. Bystanders freeze, their faces etched with shock and uncertainty. Some glance at each other nervously, others whip out their phones, likely filming the scene rather than offering help. Aaliyah's instincts kick in immediately. Years of nursing training take over, pushing aside her personal turmoil for the moment. Without hesitation, she darts across the street, weaving through traffic until she reaches the fallen man. Kneeling beside him, she quickly assesses his condition. His face is pale, his lips tinged with blue. He isn't breathing properly. "Someone call 911, she shouts, her voice sharp and commanding, cutting through the murmurs of the crowd. "He's in cardiac distress." Her hands move swiftly, tilting his head back to open his airway. When he doesn't respond, she begins chest compressions, counting under her breath. Around her, chaos erupts. People murmur anxiously, some stepping closer while others retreat, unsure of how to react. One man, a younger guy in a hoodie, stands nearby, visibly panicked. "Oh my God, is he dying?" the man blurts out, his voice trembling. "He's not dead yet," Aaliyah snaps without looking up, her focus entirely on the task at hand. "But he will be if we don't act fast." She continues the compressions, her movements precise and rhythmic. After 30 pumps, she tilts the man's head back again and delivers 2 rescue breaths, her hands steady despite the adrenaline coursing through her veins. The crowd grows larger, a mix of concerned onlookers and curious passers-by. Someone finally steps forward, a woman clutching her phone. "I called 911, she says shakily. "They're sending an ambulance." "Good," Aaliyah replies tersely, never breaking her rhythm. "How long ago did you call?" "Maybe 2 minutes, the woman guesses. "All right. Keep them updated if anything changes." Behind her, the man in the hoodie paces frantically, muttering to himself. "This is insane. This is so insane." Aaliyah ignores him, focusing instead on the man lying unconscious before her. She repeats the cycle of compressions and breaths, her mind blocking out everything except the urgency of the moment. Time seems to stretch endlessly as Aaliyah works tirelessly to keep the man alive. Sweat beads on her forehead, but she doesn't stop, not even when her arms begin to ache from the effort. Finally, after what feels like an eternity, the distant wail of sirens cuts through the air. Relief washes over her briefly, though she knows her job isn't done yet. The ambulance screeches to a halt nearby, and paramedics rush toward the scene, wheeling a stretcher behind them. They quickly take over, attaching oxygen masks and defibrillator pads to the man. One of the paramedics glances at Aaliyah, noting her calm demeanor and obvious expertise. "You a nurse or something?" he asks, his tone respectful. "Yes," she replies simply, stepping back to let them work. "I was just passing by." The paramedic nods appreciatively. "You did good. Probably saved his life." Aaliyah watches silently as they load the man onto the stretcher and into the ambulance. The crowd begins to disperse, the initial panic fading now that professionals are handling the situation. As the ambulance speeds away, sirens blaring, Aaliyah exhales deeply, her body sagging with exhaustion. Only then does she realize how tightly wounded she'd been during those critical moments. The man in the hoodie approaches her hesitantly, his earlier panic replaced by gratitude. "Hey," he says softly. Thank you. That was incredible." Aaliyah shrugs, brushing off the compliment. "Anyone would have done the same." "No, they wouldn't," he insists, shaking his head. "I froze. Everyone froze. But you didn't even hesitate." She looks at him, seeing the sincerity in his eyes, and manages a faint smile. "It's what I'm trained to do." Still, his words linger in her mind as she turns to leave. For the first time since losing her job, she feels a flicker of pride, not for the recognition, but for the reminder that her skills still matter. That she still has something valuable to offer, even when everything else feels uncertain. Walking away from the scene, Aaliyah pulls her coat tighter around herself, the chill of the evening air seeping into her bones. Yet beneath the surface, a tiny ember of hope burns brighter than before. The adrenaline coursing through Aaliyah's veins begins to ebb as the paramedics take over, but her relief is short-lived. As she steps back from the scene, still catching her breath, a sudden murmur ripples through the crowd behind her. At first, it's faint, a whisper here, a gasp there, but soon it grows louder, more accusatory. A woman standing nearby points at Aaliyah, her eyes wide with shock. "Wait, is she going through his pockets?" Aaliyah freezes mid-motion, her hand instinctively reaching for her coat pocket where she'd tucked her phone moments earlier. She hadn't even realized how it might look, her leaning over the man, rifling briefly to ensure her phone was secure while staying close to monitor his condition. But now, the damage is done. Another voice chimes in, hesitant but laced with suspicion. "Is she robbing him? The accusation stings like ice against her skin. Aaliyah turns sharply toward the source of the comment, a middle-aged man in a puffer jacket, his arms crossed defensively. His tone isn't outright hostile, but the doubt in his voice cuts deeper than any insult ever could. "I'm not robbing anyone." Aaliyah snaps, her frustration boiling over. "I'm saving his life." But the murmurs continue to spread, growing louder and more pointed. Someone mutters something about people taking advantage, while another shakes their head disapprovingly. The crowd that had initially gathered out of concern now seems torn between admiration for her quick actions and suspicion fueled by prejudice. Aaliyah clenches her fists, biting back the urge to scream. 6 years, she thinks bitterly. 6 years of late nights, skipped meals, and pouring my soul into helping strangers, and now they think I'm some kind of thief? Her mind races with anger and disbelief. She knows exactly why this is happening. It's not just about what they saw, it's about who they see. A black woman on a street corner, acting decisively in a crisis, must have ulterior motives. That's the narrative they've been conditioned to believe. For a moment, she considers walking away. Let them think what they want, she's already done her part. But then she glances back at the fallen man, now hooked up to oxygen by the paramedics. He's still unconscious, his fate hanging precariously in the balance. No. She can't let their ignorance derail her purpose. Not today. With renewed determination, Aaliyah kneels beside the stretcher once more, ignoring the whispers swirling around her. Her hands find their rhythm again, delivering steady chest compressions as the paramedics prepare to transport him to the hospital. "You don't have to prove anything to them," one of the paramedics says quietly, noticing her steely focus. "It's not about proving anything," Aaliyah replies, her voice tight with emotion. "It's about doing what's right." As the ambulance pulls away, sirens wailing, the crowd begins to disperse. Some people linger, casting wary glances at Aaliyah before finally moving on. Others avoid eye contact altogether, their earlier curiosity replaced by discomfort. The woman who'd accused her of theft approaches cautiously, her expression sheepish. "Look, I didn't mean to cause trouble," she starts, trailing off awkwardly. "You didn't mean to?" Aaliyah interrupts, her tone sharp but controlled. "Then maybe next time, instead of jumping to conclusions, you'll stop and think before accusing someone of something they'd never do." The woman flushes, clearly embarrassed, and mumbles an apology before hurrying off. Aaliyah exhales slowly, letting the tension drain from her body. She knows she should feel vindicated, after all, she did everything right, but the weight of their mistrust lingers, heavy and unshakable. Standing alone on the sidewalk, Aaliyah wraps her arms around herself, trying to ward off both the physical chill and the emotional toll of the past few minutes. She replays the scene in her mind, the collapse, the CPR, the accusations, and shakes her head in disbelief. How could people be so quick to judge? Didn't they see her training? Her dedication? Or was it easier to believe the worst because of the color of her skin? Her thoughts drift to her patients at Memorial West Hospital, the ones who trusted her implicitly, who relied on her care without question. They never doubted her intentions. Why couldn't everyone else be like that? But deep down, she knows the answer. This isn't new territory for her. She's faced prejudice before, though never quite so publicly. And yet, despite the sting of betrayal, she refuses to let it break her. Because she knows who she is. She's Aaliyah Carter, a nurse, a caregiver, a fighter. And no amount of misplaced suspicion will change that. Taking a deep breath, she squares her shoulders and begins walking again, her steps firmer this time. Whatever challenges lie ahead, she'll face them head-on. The crowd's murmurs grow louder, their accusatory whispers swirling around Aaliyah like a suffocating fog. She tries to block them out, her focus still fixed on the fallen man as she continues chest compressions with steady precision. But the tension in the air is palpable, and every muttered accusation feels like another weight pressing down on her shoulders. Just as she begins to feel overwhelmed, a deep, commanding voice cuts through the chaos. Enough. Everyone turns toward the source of the interruption, a tall, broad-shouldered man in his late 40s, dressed in a tailored navy coat. His presence commands immediate attention, his piercing gaze sweeping over the crowd before landing squarely on Aaliyah. "She's a nurse," he declares firmly, his tone leaving no room for argument. "She's saving this man's life. You should be thanking her, not accusing her of something so vile." The crowd falls silent, their earlier suspicions momentarily forgotten under the weight of his authority. Even Aaliyah pauses mid-compression, glancing up at him briefly before refocusing on the task at hand. The man steps closer, his expression unwavering. "If you don't know what you're seeing, maybe you shouldn't jump to conclusions. This woman is doing more for him than any of you have dared to do." His words hang in the air, silencing even the most vocal skeptics. Some people shuffle uncomfortably, while others exchange guilty looks. Aaliyah doesn't say anything, choosing instead to channel all her energy into keeping the man alive. Her hands move rhythmically, counting under her breath as she delivers each compression. The paramedics are still en route, but time feels like it's slipping away faster with each passing second. Suddenly, the man gasps, a weak, rasping sound that sends a wave of relief washing over Aaliyah. His eyes flutter open, disoriented but alive. "He's coming to," someone in the crowd says softly, their voice filled with awe. Aaliyah leans closer, speaking gently to him. "You're okay. Help is on the way. Just stay with me." The man blinks slowly, his breathing shallow but steady. Though he doesn't respond, the fact that he's regained consciousness is enough to ease some of the tension in the air. Behind her, the stranger who'd spoken up, Marcus Bennett, watches quietly, his arms crossed over his chest. There's an intensity to his demeanor, but also a quiet admiration as he observes Aaliyah's calm professionalism. When the distant wail of sirens finally pierces the silence, the crowd collectively exhales. The ambulance screeches to a halt nearby, and paramedics rush to take over, quickly assessing the situation and stabilizing the man before loading him onto a stretcher. One of the paramedics turns to Aaliyah, offering a respectful nod. "Thanks for stepping in. You did great work here." Aaliyah manages a faint smile, though her exhaustion is evident. "Just doing my job." But as the paramedics wheel the stretcher toward the ambulance, she doesn't stick around to hear any expressions of gratitude, or lingering doubts, from the crowd. Instead, she steps back, pulling her coat tighter around herself as she prepares to leave. Marcus notices her retreating form and calls out after her. "Hey! Wait a second." Aaliyah hesitates, glancing over her shoulder. "What?" "You handled that situation perfectly," he says, his tone softer now. "Don't let those people get to you. They don't know what they're talking about." She nods curtly, appreciating the sentiment but unwilling to dwell on the moment. "Thanks. I appreciate it." Before he can say anything else, she turns and walks away, her pace deliberate as she puts distance between herself and the scene. As Aaliyah moves further down the street, the sounds of the city gradually drown out the fading commotion behind her. The encounter has left her drained, not just physically, but emotionally, but there's also a flicker of pride buried beneath the fatigue. Despite the accusations, despite the prejudice, she stayed true to her purpose. She didn't let fear or judgment stop her from doing what needed to be done. And that mattered more than any misplaced thanks, or criticism, from strangers. Her thoughts drift briefly to Marcus, the stranger who'd stepped in to defend her. Who was he? Why had he intervened? She doesn't have answers, but his words linger in her mind, offering a small measure of comfort amidst the chaos. For now, though, she focuses on putting one foot in front of the other. The road ahead may be uncertain, but she knows one thing for sure: she'll keep fighting, for herself, for her patience, and for the belief that doing the right thing always matters, no matter who's watching. Aaliyah steps through the door of her small, dimly lit apartment, letting it close behind her with a soft click. The warmth of the space, a stark contrast to the biting cold outside, does little to ease the heaviness in her chest. She drops her bag on the floor by the entrance and kicks off her boots, wincing as they hit the hardwood with a dull thud. The apartment is quiet except for the faint hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen. It's cozy, but not without its reminders of struggle. A stack of unopened mail sits on the dining table, teetering precariously like a house of cards ready to collapse. She knows what's inside: overdue notices, late fees, demands for payment, but she can't bring herself to face them tonight. Not yet. Instead, she sinks onto the edge of her worn-out couch, resting her elbows on her knees and burying her face in her hands. The events of the day replay in her mind like a broken record: Dr. Whitmore's cold dismissal, the weight of unpaid bills pressing down on her, the man collapsing in the street, the crowd's accusing whispers. Asterisk, she's robbing him. Asterisk. The words echo in her head, sharp and cutting. How could they think that? After everything she'd done, after 6 years of pouring her heart into caring for others, they saw her as a criminal. Her jaw tightens as anger mingles with exhaustion. She saved a man's life today. She acted when no one else would. And still, they doubted her. Unable to sit still any longer, Aaliyah stands and paces across the room, her bare feet padding softly against the floor. Her eyes land on the pile of mail again, taunting her from the table. With a frustrated sigh, she finally gives in and grabs the stack, flipping through it absently. Bill after bill stares back at her, each envelope marked with bold red letters: past due, final notice, action required. Rent, utilities, student loans, it's all there, a relentless reminder of how fragile her situation has become. She tosses the pile onto the table harder than intended, scattering papers across the surface. For a moment, she considers calling Mia, her best friend, or even her mom. But what would she say? That she lost her job? That strangers accused her of theft while she was trying to save someone's life? That she feels completely and utterly defeated? No. She couldn't burden them with this, not tonight. Her gaze drifts to the window, where the city lights flicker faintly in the distance. Outside, life goes on as usual, oblivious to her turmoil. People laugh, argue, dream, all while she sits here drowning in doubt and fear. Exhaustion pulls at her, dragging her toward the bedroom despite her restless thoughts. She changes into an oversized t-shirt and climbs under the thin blanket, curling into a ball on the mattress. The silence of the room feels suffocating now, amplifying every racing thought in her mind. I saved his life, she thinks bitterly. And they saw me as a thief. Her chest tightens as tears prick at the corners of her eyes. She tries to blink them away, but they spill over anyway, sliding silently down her cheeks. Why does it hurt so much? She's faced prejudice before. She knows better than to expect fairness in a world that often sees her skin color first and her actions second. But today felt different. Today, she gave everything she had, only to be met with suspicion and mistrust. Her breathing grows uneven as sleep begins to creep in, pulling her under like a tide she can't fight. Images flash behind her closed eyelids, the man collapsing, the crowd whispering, Marcus stepping forward to defend her. As consciousness slips further away, Aaliyah's thoughts blur together, a jumble of emotions and questions she doesn't have answers to. What if she hadn't been there? What if no one had stepped up to help? Would the man have survived? Would anyone have cared enough to try? And what about her? What happens next, for her career, her future, her sense of purpose? These doubts swirl around her like storm clouds, threatening to pull her deeper into despair. But somewhere beneath the weight of it all, a tiny spark remains, a stubborn refusal to give up completely. For now, though, sleep claims her, restless and uneasy, leaving her to wrestle with her fears in the shadows of the night. The morning light filters through the blinds, casting faint golden streaks across Aaliyah's small apartment. Her alarm clock blares insistently on the nightstand, but she doesn't move to turn it off. She lies still, her body heavy with fatigue, her mind foggy from the restless sleep that had offered no real rest. Just as she contemplates pulling the blanket over her head and ignoring the day entirely, a loud knock startles her awake. Knock. 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 3 sharp raps echo through the quiet space, jolting her upright. She rubs her eyes groggily, glancing at the clock. 7 a.m. Who could possibly be here this early? She hesitates for a moment, debating whether to ignore it. But the knocking comes again, louder this time, more insistent. Sighing, Aaliyah climbs out of bed, padding barefoot to the door. She peers cautiously through the peephole, squinting against the brightness outside. Standing in the hallway is Marcus Bennett, the same man who defended her yesterday. He's dressed impeccably in a tailored suit, his posture confident and composed. Behind him, parked along the curb, are 4 sleek luxury cars gleaming under the soft morning sun. Her heart skips a beat. What is he doing here? And why does he look like he belongs in a magazine spread instead of outside her modest apartment building? Taking a deep breath, Aaliyah unlocks the door and cracks it open slightly, keeping the chain latch secure. She peers out warily, her voice tinged with confusion. What do you want? She asks, her tone guarded. Marcus meets her gaze evenly, his expression unreadable but not unkind. Aaliyah Carter? Yes, she replies cautiously. That's me. My name is Marcus Bennett, he says, though she already knows who he is. I'm here on behalf of my father, the man you saved yesterday. Aaliyah's brow furrows as she processes his words. Your father? Yes, Marcus confirms, nodding once. He regained consciousness last night and has been asking about you ever since. He wants to thank you personally. She blinks, caught off guard by the unexpected request. Thank me? For what? I was just doing my job. Marcus raises an eyebrow, a hint of amusement flickering in his dark eyes. Not everyone would have done what you did. Especially not under those circumstances. Aaliyah shifts uncomfortably, unsure how to respond. Look, I appreciate the sentiment, but I don't need thanks. Really? Marcus tilts his head slightly, studying her. You might not think you need it, but my father disagrees. He insists on meeting you. Aaliyah shakes her head, frustration creeping into her voice. This isn't a good time. I have things to deal with. Things can wait, Marcus replies smoothly, his tone leaving little room for argument. My driver will take you wherever you need to go afterward. Consider it gratitude for saving his life. She narrows her eyes, suspicion mingling with curiosity. Why does he even care? People get helped every day, it's not usually a big deal. Marcus's expression softens slightly, though his composure remains intact. Because not everyone steps up when it matters most. You did. That means something to him, and to me. For a moment, Aaliyah considers refusing outright. But something about Marcus's demeanor disarms her. There's sincerity in his voice, a quiet conviction that makes it hard to dismiss him entirely. Fine, she relents finally, stepping back from the door. Give me 5 minutes to get dressed. Marcus nods approvingly. Take your time. We'll be waiting. As she closes the door and leans against it, Aaliyah exhales slowly, running a hand through her tousled hair. What had she just agreed to? Meeting the man she saved wasn't exactly on her list of priorities today, or ever. Still, there's a part of her that feels curious. Who was this man whose life she'd intervened to save? And why was he so determined to see her? Pushing aside her doubts, she quickly changes into a pair of jeans and a simple sweater, brushing her teeth and splashing water on her face to wake herself up fully. As she grabs her coat and steps back into the hallway, she locks the door behind her, steeling herself for whatever comes next. When she emerges from the building, Marcus is standing beside one of the luxury cars, holding the passenger side door open for her. His presence is commanding yet oddly comforting, and despite her initial hesitation, she finds herself climbing inside without protest. As the car pulls away from the curb, Aaliyah stares out the window, watching the city blur past. Whatever awaits her at the end of this ride, she knows one thing for sure: it's bound to change her day in ways she can't yet imagine. The car glides smoothly through the streets of Chicago, its leather seats and polished interior a stark contrast to Aaliyah's modest apartment. She sits stiffly in the passenger seat, her hands clasped tightly in her lap as she stares out the window. The cityscape shifts from bustling neighborhoods to more upscale areas, where towering glass buildings and chic boutiques line the streets. Finally, the car pulls up outside a high-end cafe with floor-to-ceiling windows and minimalist decor. Patrons sip lattes at marble tables, their outfits impeccably tailored. Aaliyah hesitates for a moment before stepping out of the car, feeling distinctly out of place in her simple sweater and jeans. Marcus leads her inside, his confident stride drawing curious glances from the other patrons. He guides her to a quiet corner table near the back, where a man in his late 60s sits waiting. His salt and pepper hair is neatly combed, and his suit, though casual compared to Marcus's, still screams wealth and sophistication. "Aaliyah," the older man says warmly, standing to greet her. His voice is gentle but firm, carrying an air of authority softened by gratitude. "Please, sit." She does as he gestures, perching on the edge of the chair awkwardly. "Mr. Bennett. I'm glad you're feeling better." "Thanks to you," he replies, his eyes twinkling with sincerity. "I owe you my life, and so much more." Aaliyah shakes her head quickly, dismissing the praise. "You don't owe me anything. I was just doing what anyone would have done." Marcus takes a seat beside his father, interjecting smoothly. "Not everyone would have acted as bravely as you did, not under those circumstances." Aaliyah shifts uncomfortably, unsure how to respond. This level of gratitude feels almost foreign to her, especially after the accusations she faced yesterday. The waiter arrives, placing steaming cups of coffee in front of them. Aaliyah wraps her hands around hers, letting the warmth seep into her fingers as she tries to steady her nerves. Mr. Bennett leans forward slightly, his expression earnest. "Ms. Carter, I understand that words alone can't repay what you've done. But I want to offer something tangible, a way to show my appreciation." Before she can protest, Marcus slides an envelope across the table toward her. It's plain white, unassuming, but the weight of it feels significant. Aaliyah eyes it warily, shaking her head. "I don't need charity. I didn't save your life expecting anything in return." "It's not charity," Marcus clarifies firmly, his tone leaving no room for argument. "It's an investment, in someone who deserves it." Curiosity gets the better of her, and she picks up the envelope reluctantly, turning it over in her hands. Inside, she finds a single sheet of paper detailing a full scholarship to medical school, an opportunity that had always felt impossibly out of reach due to her financial struggles. Her breath catches in her throat as she reads the details, her heart pounding harder with each passing second. This is too much," she stammers, looking between Marcus and Mr. Bennett. "I can't accept this." Mr. Bennett smiles kindly, leaning back in his chair. "Why not? You've already proven yourself capable of greatness. All we're doing is giving you the tools to achieve it." "But why me?" Aaliyah asks, her voice tinged with disbelief. "There are plenty of people smarter, more qualified." "You stepped up when no one else would," Marcus interrupts, his tone unwavering. "That says more about your character than any resume ever could." His words linger in the air, sinking in slowly. She thinks back to all the times she'd doubted herself, questioned whether she was good enough, strong enough, worthy enough. And yet here they were, offering her a chance to chase a dream she'd nearly given up on. "I don't know what to say," she admits quietly, her voice trembling slightly. "You don't have to decide right now," Mr. Bennet reassures her. "But I hope you'll consider it. People like you, the ones who care deeply and act selflessly, are exactly what this world needs more of." Aaliyah stares down at the envelope again, her mind racing. The weight of the decision presses down on her, mingled with a flicker of hope she hasn't felt in years. Could she really do this? Could she step into a future she'd once only dreamed of? For now, she tucks the envelope carefully into her bag, nodding slowly. "Thank you. For believing in me, even when I wasn't sure I believed in myself." Mr. Bennet smiles warmly, while Marcus nods approvingly. "You won't regret it," he says confidently. As they rise to leave, Aaliyah feels a strange mix of emotions swirling inside her, gratitude, uncertainty, and a cautious optimism she hasn't allowed herself to feel in far too long. Walking out of the cafe, she glances back at the two men, their presence still radiating kindness and conviction. Whatever happens next, one thing is certain: her life has changed forever. The car ride back to her apartment feels surreal, as if the world outside has shifted slightly while she wasn't paying attention. Aaliyah sits quietly in the passenger seat, the envelope tucked safely inside her bag but weighing heavily on her mind. Do I really deserve this? The question loops endlessly in her thoughts, each iteration bringing a fresh wave of doubt. Yes, she'd saved Mr. Bennet's life, but wasn't that just part of being a nurse? Something anyone in her position would have done? She glances out the window, watching the city blur past. The scholarship is an opportunity she'd only dreamed of, a chance to become more than just a nurse, to step into a role where she could make an even greater impact. But it also feels too good to be true. Marcus notices her silence and glances over briefly, his expression thoughtful. "You okay?" he asks, his tone gentle. "Yeah," she replies quickly, forcing a small smile. "Just processing everything." He nods understandingly. "Take your time. No rush." But there is a rush, or at least, that's how it feels to her. Every second that passes brings another layer of uncertainty, another reason to second-guess herself. When the car finally pulls up outside her building, she thanks Marcus politely before stepping out. As she watches the sleek vehicle drive away, she realizes the decision ahead isn't one she can make alone. Back in her apartment, Aaliyah paces the living room, her mind racing. She pulls the envelope from her bag and lays it on the table, staring at it like it might hold all the answers. What if I fail? What if I'm not good enough? Her inner monologue spirals, feeding her doubts until they feel insurmountable. The thought of accepting such a generous offer, and then falling short, terrifies her. Finally, she reaches for her phone and scrolls through her contacts until she lands on Mom. It's late, but she knows her mother will pick up no matter what time it is. The call connects after 2 rings, and her mom's familiar voice fills her ear. "Aaliyah? Everything all right, sweetheart?" "Hey, Mom," Aaliyah says softly, sinking onto the couch. I need some advice." Her mom pauses, sensing the seriousness in her tone. "Of course, baby. What's going on?" Taking a deep breath, Aaliyah explains everything: the job loss, the man collapsing in the street, the accusations from the crowd, and finally, the unexpected offer from Mr. Bennet. When she finishes, there's a long pause on the other end of the line. "Well," her mom begins slowly, her voice warm and steady. "That's quite a story." "I know," Aaliyah replies, her voice cracking slightly. "But do I really deserve this? What if I mess it up?" Her mom sighs gently, the sound carrying decades of wisdom and love. "Baby, sometimes life gives you a chance. A door opens when you least expect it. And when that happens, you don't stand there questioning why. It's not about deserving it or proving yourself. It's about taking the opportunity and seeing where it leads. But what if I'm not ready? Aaliyah whispers, tears pricking at the corners of her eyes. No one ever feels completely ready, her mom counters softly. You've spent your whole life helping others, putting everyone else first. Maybe it's time to let someone help you for a change. Take this chance, Aaliyah. Trust yourself, you're stronger than you think. Her words settle over Aaliyah like a comforting blanket, easing some of the tension in her chest. Her mom has always had a way of cutting through her doubts, of reminding her of her own worth when she forgets it herself. You're right, Aaliyah murmurs finally, her voice steadier now. I'll think about it. I know you will, her mom replies warmly. And whatever you decide, I'm proud of you. Always. After hanging up, Aaliyah sits in silence for a moment, letting her mom's words sink in. She picks up the envelope again, tracing its edges with her fingers. Maybe she doesn't have to have all the answers right now. Maybe it's enough to take the first step, to believe that she's capable of more than she's allowed herself to dream. For the first time in days, the weight on her shoulders feels lighter. Not gone entirely, but manageable. Hopeful, even. She places the envelope carefully on the table, standing to pour herself a glass of water. As she drinks it slowly, she allows herself to imagine what might come next, a future filled with possibilities she'd once thought were out of reach. Whatever happens, she knows one thing for sure, she won't let fear stop her from trying. The next morning, Aaliyah stands outside a towering skyscraper in downtown Chicago, her heart pounding as she stares up at the gleaming glass facade. This is it, the moment of truth. After hours of restless deliberation and countless conversations with herself and her mom, she's decided to take the leap. She steps into the lobby, its polished marble floors reflecting the soft glow of chandeliers above. The receptionist greets her warmly, confirming her appointment before directing her toward the elevator. With each ascending floor, Aaliyah feels the weight of anticipation growing heavier, but this time, it's not fear that anchors her. It's hope. When the doors open, she finds herself in a sleek, modern office suite. A young assistant ushers her into a spacious corner office where William Bennett sits behind a large desk, his sharp features softened by a genuine smile. Aaliyah, he says, rising to greet her. His voice carries the same warmth and sincerity she'd heard at the cafe. Thank you for coming. Mr. Bennett, she replies, shaking his outstretched hand firmly. Her tone is polite but tinged with nervousness. Please, call me William, he insists, gesturing for her to sit. I want us to be on equal footing here. She nods and takes a seat, clutching her bag tightly in her lap. For a moment, neither speaks, the silence stretches just long enough for her to gather her thoughts. William leans forward slightly, his expression earnest. Ms. Carter, Aaliyah, I can't thank you enough for what you did. You saved my life when no one else stepped up. That kind of courage, it doesn't come around often. Aaliyah shifts uncomfortably, brushing off the compliment. I was just doing what anyone would have done. But they didn't, William counters gently. And that's why I want to do something for you. People like you, the ones who care deeply, who act selflessly, they deserve opportunities to grow, to thrive. Let me help you build the future you deserve. His words resonate deeply, stirring emotions she spent years burying beneath layers of doubt and responsibility. She thinks about all the sacrifices she's made, all the dreams she's put on hold to care for others. And now, someone is offering her a chance to reclaim those dreams, to rewrite her story. She begins hesitantly, her voice trembling. I don't know how to repay you for this. You don't have to, William replies firmly. This isn't repayment, it's gratitude. Pure and simple. Aaliyah looks down at her hands, considering his words carefully. There's still a part of her that wonders if she's worthy of such generosity, if she'll live up to the expectations tied to this opportunity. But another part, a stronger, more determined part, reminds her of her mother's advice. Sometimes life gives you a chance. Take it. Lifting her gaze, she meets William's eyes squarely. "All right," she says finally, her voice steady despite the storm of emotions swirling inside her. "I'm in." William smiles, relief and pride evident in his expression. "I'm glad to hear that. You won't regret this, Aaliyah. I promise you that." She nods, allowing herself to believe, for the first time in a long while, that maybe things really will work out. As they discuss the next steps, Aaliyah feels a renewed sense of purpose settling over her. The scholarship isn't just an offer, it's a lifeline, a chance to redefine who she is and what she's capable of achieving. For so long, she's carried the weight of other people's struggles on her shoulders, putting their needs before her own. Now, she realizes, it's okay to prioritize herself, to chase a dream she thought was lost forever. When the meeting ends, William walks her to the door, his demeanor calm and encouraging. "You're going to do great things, Aaliyah. I can feel it." "Thank you," she says softly, meaning every word. "For believing in me." With that, she steps back into the bustling city, her steps lighter than they've been in weeks. The road ahead won't be easy, but for the first time in a long time, she feels ready to face it head-on. The first few weeks of medical school are a whirlwind, a blur of lectures, textbooks, and late-night study sessions. Aaliyah sits in the front row of her anatomy class, her notebook open and pen poised as the professor drones on about the intricacies of the human body. Around her, the hum of whispered conversations fills the air, but she tunes them out, focusing instead on every word being said. She's determined to absorb everything, to prove to herself, and to everyone else, that she belongs here. But despite her focus, she can't ignore the subtle undercurrents of judgment rippling through the room. Some classmates glance at her sideways, their expression skeptical. Others outright avoid sitting near her, leaving an empty seat on either side like an invisible barrier. During one particularly grueling lecture, the professor calls on her unexpectedly. "Ms. Carter," he says sharply, his tone clipped. "Can you explain the function of the brachial plexus?" Aaliyah freezes for a split second before regaining her composure. She flips through her notes quickly, finding the relevant section. "Yes, sir," she replies confidently. The brachial plexus is a network of nerves responsible for motor and sensory functions in the upper limbs. Close, but incomplete, the professor interrupts, cutting her off mid-sentence. He turns to another student without acknowledging her further. Her cheeks burn with embarrassment, though she forces herself not to look away. She knows what just happened. It wasn't about her answer, it was about who she is. Later that day, Aaliyah finds herself alone in the library, surrounded by towering shelves of books and the faint hum of fluorescent lights overhead. She stares blankly at her laptop screen, the words swimming together as frustration builds inside her. Why does it feel like everyone is waiting for her to fail? Like they're daring her to slip up so they can say, *C. She didn't belong here anyway, *. Her inner monologue takes over, echoing louder than the doubts creeping into her mind. *I fought to get here. I worked harder than anyone else in that classroom. I'm not giving up now, *. She closes her laptop with a firm click and leans back in her chair, exhaling slowly. The scholarship may have opened the door, but walking through it has been far from easy. Every step feels like a battle, a test of resilience against biases she'd hoped to leave behind. But she reminds herself why she started this journey. Not for validation or approval, but because she believes in her ability to make a difference. To heal, to help, to inspire others the way she's been inspired. As the days turn into weeks, Aaliyah learns to navigate the challenges with quiet determination. When professors dismiss her contributions, she studies twice as hard to ensure she knows the material better than anyone else. When classmates exclude her from group projects, she forms connections with those who value her work ethic and passion. One evening, after a particularly tough day, she meets up with Mia, her best friend, at a small coffee shop near campus. They sit in a cozy corner booth, steam rising from their cups as they talk. "It's like no matter what I do, some people won't see me as an equal," Aaliyah admits, her voice tinged with frustration. Mia reaches across the table, placing a reassuring hand over hers. "You know what? Those people don't matter. What matters is how you see yourself, and trust me, girl, you're killing it." Aaliyah smiles faintly, appreciating the encouragement. "Thanks, Mia. I needed to hear that." "You've got this," Mia says firmly. "And when you graduate, and you will, you'll show them all exactly why William Bennett chose you." Back in her dorm later that night, Aaliyah opens her laptop again, pulling up her lecture notes. The weight of the day still lingers, but it doesn't crush her anymore. Instead, it fuels her drive to push forward. She writes a single sentence at the top of her notes: "I am here because I earned it." Beneath it, she begins outlining her study plan for the week, organizing chapters and diagrams with meticulous care. Each stroke of her pen feels like reclaiming a piece of herself, a declaration that she won't be defined by prejudice or doubt. As she works, her resolve strengthens. This isn't just about surviving medical school, it's about thriving. About proving to herself that she's capable of greatness, no matter how many obstacles stand in her way. Aaliyah stands in the bustling hallway of Memorial West Hospital, ironically, the same place where her journey as a nurse began and ended. Now, wearing the crisp white coat of a medical intern, she moves with purpose, her stethoscope draped around her neck like a badge of honor. It's late evening, and the hospital is alive with the hum of activity. Nurses bustle between rooms, doctors exchange updates in hushed tones, and monitors beep rhythmically in the background. Aaliyah checks her clipboard one last time, reviewing the status of her patients before making her rounds. As she steps into room 312, she notices an elderly man lying on the bed, his breathing shallow and labored. His chart indicates he's recovering from pneumonia, but something about his condition feels off. She approaches him gently, placing a hand on his shoulder. "Mr. Alvarez," she says softly, "how are you feeling?" The man mumbles weakly, his words barely audible. Before she can respond, the heart monitor beside him begins to screech, a flat line cutting through the air like a knife. Her stomach drops. Code blue. Aaliyah's training kicks in immediately, overriding the panic that threatens to creep in. She presses the emergency button on the wall, her voice steady as she calls out, "Code blue, room 312. Within seconds, the room fills with staff members rushing in to assist. Aaliyah takes charge instinctively, positioning herself at the head of the bed. "Start compressions," she orders, her hands moving swiftly to begin chest compressions. The rhythm is familiar, muscle memory guiding her movements as she counts under her breath. 1, 2, 3, 4. Memories flood back, the day she saved William Bennett, the accusations from the crowd, the weight of judgment pressing down on her. This moment feels eerily similar, except now, there's no crowd watching, no whispers of doubt. Just the urgency of saving a life. After 30 compressions, she tilts the man's head back and delivers 2 rescue breaths, her focus unwavering. Around her, the team works seamlessly, prepping the defibrillator and administering medications as needed. "Clear," someone shouts, delivering a shock to the patient's chest. The monitor continues its harsh monotone. Again. Aaliyah demands, resuming compressions without hesitation. Her arms ache, but she doesn't stop, not until the monitor finally beeps back to life, signaling a heartbeat. The room exhales collectively as the patient stabilizes. One of the attending physicians pats Aaliyah on the back, offering a nod of approval. "Good work, Carter," he says gruffly, though his tone carries genuine respect. She nods briefly, stepping back to let the nurses take over. Her hands tremble slightly as adrenaline courses through her veins, but her expression remains calm. For a moment, she allows herself to reflect on how far she's come, from the nurse who was dismissed and doubted, to the doctor in training who just saved a life under pressure. This was her proving ground. Not for them, for herself. Later that night, Aaliyah sits alone in the break room, sipping lukewarm coffee as she processes the events of the day. The fluorescent lights buzz softly overhead, casting a pale glow across the sterile space. Her mind drifts back to the day she saved William Bennett, the accusations, the prejudice, the fear that she wasn't enough. But here she is, standing tall despite every obstacle thrown her way. She pulls out her phone and scrolls to a photo she keeps saved, a snapshot of her graduation ceremony, surrounded by classmates who once doubted her but now celebrate her success. Beneath it, she types a note to herself. "You earned this. You belong here." As she sets the phone down and leans back in her chair, a sense of peace washes over her. This isn't the end, it's only the beginning. And whatever challenges lie ahead, she knows she's ready to face them. Years have passed since Aaliyah first stepped into medical school, her heart heavy with doubt but her spirit unyielding. Now, standing in the doorway of a modest building on Chicago's South Side, she feels a profound sense of fulfillment. The sign above the entrance reads Carter Community Health Clinic, its letters bold and welcoming against the crisp morning air. Inside, the space buzzes with quiet energy. Volunteers unpack supplies, nurses arrange exam rooms, and patients trickle in cautiously, their faces reflecting both hope and skepticism. Aaliyah moves among them, her white coat spotless and her demeanor warm yet professional. She pauses by the front desk, reviewing the schedule for the day. Her clinic isn't just another healthcare facility, it's a lifeline for families who can't afford private care, for those who've been overlooked or dismissed by the system. It's her way of giving back, of honoring the struggles that shaped her journey. As she straightens up, a familiar voice interrupts her thoughts. "You really did it," Marcus says, stepping through the door behind her. His tailored suit stands out amidst the casual attire of the volunteers, but his smile is genuine. Aaliyah turns to face him, raising an eyebrow playfully. "Did you doubt I would?" Marcus chuckles, shaking his head. "Not for a second. I always knew you'd change lives." Aaliyah smirks, crossing her arms over her chest as she leans casually against the counter. "Funny thing is, I think I started by changing my own." Her words carry weight, not just for Marcus, but for herself. She thinks back to the woman she used to be, the nurse struggling to make ends meet, the caregiver doubted and dismissed at every turn. That version of herself would hardly recognize the confident, accomplished doctor standing here now. Marcus steps closer, his expression thoughtful. "You're proof that opportunity isn't wasted on the right person. My father would be proud." "Your father already was proud," Aaliyah replies softly, her voice tinged with gratitude. "He gave me a chance when I needed it most. This," she gestures around the bustling clinic. "This is how I pay it forward." Marcus nods approvingly, taking in the scene before him. Families sit patiently in the waiting area, children clutch teddy bears while mothers fill out forms. The atmosphere is one of quiet hope, a stark contrast to the sterile indifference of many hospitals. "You've built something incredible here," Marcus says finally, his tone sincere. "It's going to mean so much to this community." Aaliyah glances around the room, her gaze lingering on each face. There's Mrs. Henderson, the elderly woman whose chemotherapy treatments she once managed, little Tommy, now older and healthier thanks to consistent care, and countless others whose stories intertwine with hers. "It's not about me," she says quietly, more to herself than to Marcus. "It's about them. About making sure no one gets left behind because they don't have access, or because someone doesn't believe in them." Her words hang in the air, resonating deeply. Marcus watches her for a moment longer, then extends his hand. "Congratulations, Dr. Carter. You deserve all of this, and more. She shakes his hand firmly, her smile widening. Thanks, Marcus. For everything. As he leaves, promising to visit again soon, Aaliyah takes a deep breath, savoring the moment. The clinic isn't perfect, it's small, underfunded, and understaffed, but it's hers. And it's exactly what her community needs. The final shot pans slowly across the clinic's entrance, stopping at the nameplate affixed neatly to the glass door. In bold, elegant lettering, it reads, Dr. Aaliyah Carter. The camera lingers for a beat, capturing the sunlight streaming through the windows and illuminating the sign like a beacon of hope. For Aaliyah, this isn't just the culmination of years of hard work, it's a reminder that life has a way of coming full circle. From saving William Bennett's life to opening her own clinic, she's proven that determination and compassion can overcome even the greatest odds. At its core, Aaliyah Carter's journey is a story about resilience, purpose, and the power of believing in yourself, even when the world seems determined to doubt you. Her path wasn't easy. She faced prejudice, judgment, and moments of paralyzing self-doubt. But through it all, she refused to let fear or failure define her. Instead, she chose to rise, again and again, proving that opportunity isn't just something handed to you, it's something you create for yourself. Aaliyah's story reminds us that life rarely moves in straight lines. There will be setbacks, moments when the odds feel insurmountable, and times when people underestimate your potential. But those challenges don't have to break you. They can shape you, if you let them. Every struggle Aaliyah endured became a stepping stone towards something greater, not just personal success, but the ability to uplift others who walk the same difficult roads. Her decision to open a free clinic shows us that true success isn't measured by titles or accolades, it's measured by impact. By giving back to her community, Aaliyah transformed her own pain into purpose, creating a legacy far bigger than herself. And that's the lesson here, no matter where you start or how hard the climb, your efforts can ripple outward, touching lives in ways you might never expect. If Aaliyah's journey resonated with you, then don't miss the chance to follow along for more stories like this one. Subscribe to our channel so you won't miss what comes next, because every story we share is crafted to inspire, challenge, and remind you of the incredible things humans are capable of achieving against all odds. Hit that notification bell too, because inspiration doesn't wait, and neither should you. Stay tuned. Your next favorite story is just around the corner.